Hi everyone, today we're looking again at a ChatGPT output. The question that we asked today was, how does the European fertilizer regulation impact plant biostimulant products in Europe compared to fertilizer products? That's a very legitimate question, and we are curious to see what ChatGPT, which is actually much better than other OpenAI sources that we have tested previously. So really curious to see what ChatGPT actually provides. So the text actually reads, or the response, the EU Fertilizing Products Regulation 2019/1009, commonly referred to as the EFR, came into effect on 16th of July 2022, significantly impacting both fertilizers and plant biostimulants across Europe. Yeah, that's a very general statement. Nobody would disagree with that. Then it continues, however, its effect on these two product types are distinct. Not very sure what that means. It's for me kind of a blah blah. Because distinct in what way? Due to their different functions, compositions, and regulatory histories. Yeah, I don't know where ChatGPT actually picked up on that one, because it doesn't mean anything, and it doesn't add any relevance to this question. Then it goes on with, here's a detailed comparison of how the EFR impacts plant biostimulants versus fertilizers. Okay, now let's dig into the gruesome details. It says key differences, EFR's impact on plant biostimulants versus fertilizers. Well, already we can say there's a lot of filling and a lot of, words being said which actually do not add anything in terms of value. Then it continues with a definition under the EFR of fertilizers and plant biostimulants, which are correct. I can't say anything or notice anything wrong about that. Then it continues with novelty under the EFR. And there it states fertilizers were already regulated at the EU or national level. Actually, it is the EU and the national level. But actually, so were biostimulants in many cases. So this answer is actually not correct. Then there is a second line where it states the EFR updates the scope and harmonization. Yeah, well, it provides harmonization, and indeed the scope of the previously existing fertilizer regulation was enlarged to now include biostimulants. So this answer, as it is written here, is not really complete, first of all, and second, very vague. Then it continues under novelty under the EFR. First time, biostimulants are clearly defined and regulated at the EU level under a harmonized legal framework. Yes, biostimulants have been clearly defined, that's true. However, not all biostimulant products are eligible under the EU framework. That's something which is not added, and it's a very important point. And then it continues by saying, previously, they were often regulated nationally or ambiguously. I'm very sorry, but ambiguously is a judgment, and I don't know where that judgment comes from. It's not because it's regulated at a national level that it's ambiguous. And actually, if the ambiguous means that a biostimulant could fall either under the fertilizer legislation or the pesticides legislation because of its composition, or it's the label claims it's not ambiguous. It's just it could fall under basically two different legislative frameworks. So again, this little paragraph is neither complete nor is it correct, and it contains a judgment of value which to me is completely inappropriate. Then there is another subtitle, regulatory category in the European Fertilizer Regulation. There it goes on with the defines the product function categories, or PFCs, for fertilizers, and for PFC6, which are plant biostimulants. Again, yeah, that's okay, nothing to say about that. Not sure what it means though, in terms of the response, because it doesn't add anything again. Then it continues another small title, conformity assessment, where it reads, it may involve self-declaration for module A or a notified body depending on the product type and ingredients. Wow, that's kind of a shortcut, because that actually is again completely incomplete and therefore absolutely irrelevant if you want to understand how these different modules are applied, when they applied, what you need to do, etc. So not very useful. And also it's not sure whether this actually relates to fertilizers or plant biostimulants. So this whole point under conformity assessment is completely useless to my view. Then it continues with another small title, labeling requirements. There it reads detailed but standardized, and it should actually be detailed and standardized. Nutrient content and type must be declared. Well, again, that's very broad. It's not complete, because it's not only about the nutrient content, but you also must put the PFC and CMCs, etc., etc. So again, labeling requirements are not very complete, not very useful. Then it continues with claims regulation. Actually, the claims are part of the label, so I don't know why that is here not, added on the labeling requirements. Again, very broad and not very relevant for, as regards to the, original question. Then it's the next part is market impact. There it reads, it encourages harmonization across the EU, but largely a continuation of existing framework for most products. Again, this doesn't say anything, and it omits actually to mention one very important feature when it comes to market impact, which is if you finalize successfully the conformity assessment under the EFR, and you have the CE label, then you can actually access the entire EU market at once. And even so, countries that are not in the EU, like Switzerland or Norway or the Ukraine, they accept the CE label. So this very important point on market impact is not even made. Where I always cringe is that it claims that this encourages harmonization and it encourages innovation, but I'm very sorry, I never have seen more regulation fostering innovation. Quite the contrary, because innovation can only happen when there are less regulations, because you are more free to produce new types of products. And actually only those plant biostimulants and fertilizers which are eligible under the EFR could be placed on the market. And as there is a very limited number of microorganisms that you can actually use, for the moment it's only 4 at this point in time, certain raw materials are not covered either. If your plant biostimulant is not eligible under the EFR is not an option for you. It's as simple as that. There is a significant shift according to ChatGPT, because it brings legal clarity and market access across the EU for products previously fragmented under national regimes. That is actually also for me a politically driven statement, because first of all, if you do not want to be, or let's say it like this, if you have only one target market in the EU, for instance France, Why should you go through the process of having a CE label that gives you market access to all markets if your distributor is only in France and that is your target market? So being under a national regime on the market is not a flaw. It's a marketing choice. And as I said, the market access, yes, you can have that across the EU, provided your plant biostimulant is eligible under the EFR, which is not always the case. Then it continues with the CE marking. It says it's applicable if the product meets the EFR requirements. That is incomplete and also confusing because it is applicable and mandatory if you successfully finalize the conformity assessment under any PFC of that regulation. It continues by reading required for all biostimulants placed on the EU market under the EFR. Yes, but it's also for fertilizers. So again, the responses are very vague and therefore misleading. Then specific impacts on plant biostimulants. It goes on with regulatory clarity and market access. Prior to the EFR, biostimulants were not consistently defined, often falling under national fertilizer laws or even pesticide regulation. Yeah, again, this is not a flaw. You might be very happy that in some countries your plant biostimulant would be able, you would be able to place it on the market there because it falls under a given legislation, and whether it is, whether your product falls under the fertilizer or the pesticide regulation, that is something that is dependent on composition, on claims, and you can adapt that. So it is not a flaw. And here it reads as if, the EFR is the silver bullet and the national laws, that is a bit of something that you actually do not want. Although trust me, in our practice, we have seen that the national laws, God thanks, they are still there because otherwise many biostimulants would not even reach the market. Then it continues by saying now biostimulants that meet the EFR standards can be CE marketed and sold freely across the EU. Well, there it is, finally. Removing previous market access barriers. This is completely wrong because the EFR in itself is already a barrier in itself. Because, as I said previously, not all plant biostimulants would be eligible under that EFR. For instance, if you have a plant biostimulant based on a microorganism that is not in the positive list, which consists of only 4 microorganisms for the time being, well, then you can't put it on the market. Or if you are using a raw material that is not covered by the EFR, you can't place it on the market either. And that is without commenting on the high costs, the timelines that are created by the EFR, which actually might not be a big deal for big companies which have the budget to deal with this kind of dossier costs and timelines. But for many small and medium enterprises, this is the end of it. So I do not agree with that statement that the EFR removes previous market access barriers. That's simply a political statement, and just by repeating it doesn't make it more true. Then it continues by saying scientific dossier and evidence requirements. Biostimulants must provide evidence for their claims, for instance, stress tolerance improvement through scientific trials. Yeah, there we go. If you count all the cost for doing these scientific trials, usually only big companies can afford them, or then small companies who get the necessary investment. And that is where there is a complete contradiction when it comes to, it provides market access. No, it doesn't. Depending on the case, and if you don't have all these studies, it will create a selection of only a chosen few who can afford that, and therefore many small companies still go with the national routes and for legitimate reasons. Then there is a third point on microbial biostimulant scrutiny. It reads here, if the product contains live microorganisms like Bacillus or Rhizobium, they must be listed in the component material CMC7 or CMC10 and safety must be demonstrated. No, guys. The EFR works with a positive list of microorganisms that can be used, and if you use one of those, and actually you can only use those because it's a positive list approach, you do not have to demonstrate safety in addition. So again, this is not correct and misleading. And then here it comes again, and I already touched on that, innovation incentives. It reads the recognition of biostimulants as a separate category under EU law incentivizes innovation in sustainable agriculture and precision inputs. What a nonsense, I don't know how more regulation creates more innovation, because actually with that approach, as you have to be eligible under that EFR, you always create the same types of products, and usually the ones which are the most affordable to put on the market. So no, again, just by repeating, the same lie all over again doesn't make it true. And although I appreciate that regulations are necessary in order to make sure that products are safe, I do not agree with more regulation and ever more regulation creating innovation. To the contrary, it actually makes companies question their will and motivation to invest a lot of time and money, taking the risk of creating new products which they might then at the end not be able to put on the market because the regulations are simply too stringent. By and large, the summary provided by ChatGPT, which is a tool that we use as well in our work, that output here on the question, how does the EFR impact plant biostimulant products in Europe compared to fertilizer product, is, I would rate it a 2 out of 10, not more, because it's very, very vague, incomplete, incorrect, and plenty of political statements that I do not support. As a scientific regulatory affairs manager since more than 20 years, it does not reflect my experience, and therefore I would say, yeah, we are not out of business tomorrow, because with that you wouldn't be able to work. I hope you enjoyed our admittedly so critical review of the EFR and its impact on plant biostimulants, and we see you next time. See you then. Bye bye.